A few days ago, we marked the first anniversary of Sir Keir Starmer's Labour government in power. I'm going to go through A Piece in the Eye by Eleanor Langford from let's see, this is the 4th of July, and she's laying out an analysis of the government's record on the economy, housing, infrastructure, the National Health Service, and immigration. And I'll go through that. Um, but I want to cover specifically foreign policy and also why I think this government's in a unique position. And what I mean by that is 2024, Labour done very well. Whatever way you gloss it over, it was a very, very solid election win. It was a landslide. Um, and depending how you look at it, it was close to the records in 1945 and 1997, although the majority, I believe, was less. The Tories had the worst loss ever. So any prime minister in any party in this position should be really going through an extended honeymoon period. It should be, um, a position of advantage. And yet, Starmer's party right now looks weaker than Tony Blair's did in, say, May 1998, 1 year into the Blair government. So clearly, there's something different there. It may be that the British are just generally more cynical. It may be that there's now parties like Reform that are making an impact. I don't want to exaggerate Reform's influence, and let's not forget the Liberal Democrats got 72 MPs. I think that's sometimes understated. Um, but it's this interesting situation where Labour has a majority, and yet it's not inconceivable that they'll lose the next general election. That's a strange situation. Um, what this suggests is many people are disappointed by Labour. Now, I want to be fair. I want to try and look at this as objectively as possible because I do think it is genuinely difficult for a new government to change everything from 14 years of power in just 1 year. And I think it would be unreasonable to expect Labour to do that. I also think there's some things that go beyond party policy. Um, I think crime in the justice establishment is an example of this. Um, I'm going to go through, like I said, some of those issues that I mentioned Eleanor Langford is analysing in the eye. I'll do that soon. But first of all, I want to look at a few things. I want to look at some of the domestic issues that I feel strongly about and also foreign policy. Firstly, looking at foreign policy. The Starmer government, to its credit, has been consistently hardline with Russia. I think one thing Putin is banking on is Western fatigue and this idea that if we have a new government, there'll somehow be a wavering of support. Well, Starmer and as Foreign Secretary David Lammy have been very clear. They've taken a very hard line on this. They've been very vocal in language regarding the Kremlin's aggression. They've been consistent in their support for Ukraine. I think it's encouraging because there is a risk that new government are wavering, but that hasn't happened. Um, so that's encouraging. Israel and Gaza. Now, this is a very hot button issue, maybe no more so than in the Labour Party, because it's an internal ideological struggle within the Labour Party. There were Jewish members, of course, who alleged that the Labour Party was rife with anti-Semitism. Now, I do think anti-Semitism is a real problem, but I also think that too many pro-Israelis use it as a way to try and silence debate. What I see anti-Semitism as is prejudice towards Jewish people and anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. That to me is anti-Semitism. But criticizing the state of Israel, especially when you consider that some of the biggest critics are Jewish groups, like the Jewish Voice for Peace, for right-wing Israeli government members to just dismiss everything as anti-Semitism is cynical and wrong. I mean, they've labelled everyone anti-Semitic that has criticised them in any way, shape, or form, even when they've condemned Hamas. I'm thinking of Antonio Guterres of the UN. I'm thinking of the Spanish Prime Minister Sanchez. Um, these are people who are absolutely not pro-Hamas, but they have criticised Israel's actions. So what we've seen recently is the government finally starting to take a tougher stance with Israel. And in a way, they're between a rock and a hard place. It will never be enough for groups like Palestine Action. Indeed, that's went in a particular direction. They've just been prescribed as a terror organization. I will be making a specific video about that, so stay tuned. But for pro-Palestinians in the party, Starmer's government doesn't go far enough. And yet, if you look at the likes of the Daily Telegraph, the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, and that ridiculous stance that Kemi Badenoch took at Prime Minister's questions, claiming that the government's stance would be um, welcomed by Hamas, that was outrageous, actually. Um, this idea that criticizing Israel equates to being sympathetic to Hamas is simply wrong. I am encouraged that the government is taking a harder stance. What is happening in Gaza is an abomination. We're seeing hundreds of people killed every single week. Um, thousands displaced, thousands injured. It's absolutely going well beyond self-defense. And then you couple that with genocidal ministers in Netanyahu's cabinet, far-right settlers who inflict violence on the Palestinians. It's absolutely it's unchecked in the sense that they have this green light from Trump's administration. And you get these right wing publications that, in my view, have utterly failed to hold Israel to account. I mean, you will not get objective coverage from the likes of the Daily Telegraph. So I find it a bit rich that they have the gall to criticise the BBC. The BBC is far from perfect, but I do think when it comes to this, I trust the BBC more than I trust the Daily Telegraph, because what you'll get from the Daily Telegraph is absolute 100% pro-Israel bias. They won't even mention barely the level of suffering in Gaza, or they'll mention it in a fleeting way. So if Starmer does take let's say they completely cut off support, then yes, those publications and right wing factions will absolutely condemn it. But you know what? That's what comes with leadership. You can't please everyone. And that would be morally the right thing to do. And I think it would be welcomed by the left. The EU reset, I give Starmer credit for his efforts in that regard. I think it's important. Um, Brexit purists have this mentality that if a British Prime Minister, whether they be Conservative like David Cameron or Labour like Keir Starmer, if they try to have good relations with our closest neighbours in France and Germany and elsewhere, then somehow it's a betrayal of Brexit. This obsession about betraying Brexit. I don't think Starmer is going to risk doing that because he knows it would cost him votes. But I do not understand why anyone has a problem with having good relations with our closest neighbours. This makes absolute sense, geopolitically, economically, in every sense of the word. And I think Brexit purists are deluded. I mean, one of the negative aspects of Brexit is it's made us overly reliant on the United States and the likes of China. Um, and we see the result. So I do welcome Starmer's efforts with the EU reset. Clearly, it doesn't go far enough for the EU. For example, there's a free movement of young people. Now, again, I really don't understand why people would have a problem with that. Why would anyone have a problem with a Dutch student or a Czech student studying in the UK? They're spending money in this country when they're here. Um, I just don't understand the hostility to that. We're not talking about people who have a hostile culture to ours. We're not talking about people who are hostile to this country. So I do welcome the Prime Minister's attempts at a reset. Now, when it comes to foreign policy, there's two areas I'm very critical of. China. Labour is soft on China. If this mega embassy goes ahead, and I believe the decision is going to be reached this month, then if there's a major security breach, then Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner will have a lot to answer for. The security services have been warning them, and yet the indication is they're going to go ahead with this and give planning permission to this Chinese super embassy, which we may as well call the spy embassy. Of course, Beijing denies it, but they're liars. The Communist Party of China are professional liars. They absolutely cannot be trusted. The security services have been warning about this for a long time now. Um, if this goes ahead, I think it would be a grave mistake. I think it will leave us open to a major cyber attack or allow the Chinese regime to harass dissidents on British soil. Successive governments have failed to close Confucius institutes. I mean, it isn't just Starmer's government. successive Tory governments, with the possible exception of this Truss's very short-lived government, have been soft on China. I want to see a British government with a backbone to stand up to China. Um, and so far, I would say that Starmer's government has failed in that regard. They have visited China, they've pandered to China. It's not good enough. It's absolutely not good enough when we know what sort of nefarious activities China gets up to now. At the last G20 summit in Brazil, Starmer did press Xi Jinping on human rights issues, and that's better than nothing. But it isn't just about the human rights issue, it's also about our own security. And by allowing this super embassy to go ahead, they're gambling with our security. That's unforgivable. It's absolutely one of the absolute first priorities the government has is national security. I think allowing this embassy to go ahead is insanely stupid. Um, of course, Beijing will have a tantrum if they don't get it, but bullies only understand one language. Um, okay, some domestic issues is two I want to particularly talk about: crime and welfare. I won't say too much on the welfare issue because I've already spoken about it at length. Um, but I think the climb down shows that there's dissatisfaction in the party. I think that what Starmer, Reeves, and Kendall are doing is absolutely Tory-esque. I think it's cynical. I think cutting PIP payments is callous. The same with the winter fuel allowance. I accept that, like I say, Rachel Reeves has enormous responsibility, but there would be a popular mandate for a tax on the richest in society. I mean, if it's a choice between that and punishing claimants even more, I think the answer is obvious. So I am not happy with the way the government's approaching the welfare issue. I suppose to be balanced, they have increased the national minimum wage, um, but I do not like the fact that Reeves, Kendall, and Starmer are using Tory-esque language in this regard. Claimants feel vilified, they feel scapegoated, and I don't think they've really understood the anger on this. Um, Bridget Phillipson says that the £5 billion black hole will need to be covered from other services. Why not a tax on the rich? I think that needs to be seriously looked at. I mean, my goodness, from a Labour government, this is the sort of thing Labour should be doing. Now, crime. This is something I feel very strongly about. Starmer talks tough. Yvette Cooper talks tough. I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. Um, Here's the reality. I think all parties, including Reform, talk tough on crime because they know that the majority of the British public want to see a hardline approach. Take a little drink here. But there is an elephant in the room, and that is that politicians actually don't have that much power in this regard. What they can do is set legislation. What I mean by that is, yes, they can establish what is the law, what is illegal, what is illegal, and sometimes there's controversial decisions there. But it is the Sentencing Council of England and Wales and their equivalent in Scotland that actually set sentencing guidelines. And judges then use their discretion in that regard. So I do believe that unless the justice establishment as a whole changes, then people are going to feel deeply disillusioned. For all the tough talk on crime, we have seen the issue in the prison overcrowding situation has meant that criminals have been released early. That infuriates the public. I think what Shabana Mahmood and Yvette Cooper have to do a lot more to persuade the public that those people who are being released will be under extremely tight scrutiny. So, for instance, if they're spending the rest of their sentence at home, then it has to feel like a punishment. It can't just be they are allowed to enjoy normal lives again. They have to be under constant surveillance, or at least if that's not practically possible, there has to be serious restrictions on their movement. Um, I accept that there is a problem with overcrowding, but I strongly and frankly bitterly resent the statement made by Prisons Minister James Timpson a few days after this government got into power that we punish too many people. But that's a contradiction. On one hand, Starmer's talking tough on crime, and he makes a big thing of the fact that he was head of the Crown Prosecution Service. But then you have his prisons minister, who Starmer has backed, saying we punish too many people. I was honestly quite disgusted by that, and I think James Timpson um, needs to apologise to victims of crime for saying that. Now, he's a junior minister, he's not, a major cabinet minister, but nevertheless, he's prisons minister. And for him to say that, we punish too many people, you know, that's outrageous. Even if it's his honest belief, that to me is outrageous. What sort of comfort will that give to victims of crime? And actually, importantly, the opposite is true. Career criminals routinely escape custodial sentences. I believe that the penalties for young offenders remain far, far too soft. The penalties for dangerous drivers remain too lenient. You could kill or seriously injure someone, and you might get 7 years in prison, but you're then allowed to drive again. That's outrageous. So I think overall the system remains far, far too soft on criminals. That's just the reality. Labour talks tough, but they fail to deliver. So I'm not convinced when it comes to crime. Another very important thing that needs to be addressed is this issue of two-tier justice. After, when the riots broke out last year, we saw people convicted and imprisoned, and I welcome that. I think that rioting thugs should face jail when they're putting lives at risk. I have absolutely no sympathy for those people. But this issue over Lucy Connolly, the wife of the Tory councillor who's still in prison, it's increasingly looking political. When she goes to prison, yet someone like Hugh Edwards escapes prison, avoids prison, um, and then you get the likes of Bobby Villan. Why is it that he calls for violence at Glastonbury and the police, you know, he's going to avoid prison, that yet Lucy Connolly is in prison for inciting violence? I do think that if Starmer and his party don't understand the optics of this, if they don't understand the double standards, the perceived double standards, it's going to infuriate people. It's absolutely going to go against his party. Um, I think one thing that infuriates the public is the misuse of non-crime hate incidents. I mean, when you get six uniformed officers turning up at someone's house because they've had an online feud with their primary school, their daughter's primary school, that is a disgraceful abuse of power. Now, Vic Cooper has said that she has urged the police to prioritise what the public care about. Um, so I wouldn't blame this all on the government. There is an ideological decision by police chiefs to do this, but two-tier care is a label that's going to stick unless they start to understand the optics of this. And saying, oh, it's just pandering to the far right isn't good enough. People have legitimate concerns about this. They have legitimate concerns about double standards in policing and in prosecution. Just to be clear, regarding the Lucy Connolly case, I don't think what she said was harmless. I think that inciting violence, you should be held to account for that. But 3 years in prison, I think, is probably a bit excessive. Um, so the two-tier care thing is going to stick unless they start to understand public optics on this. They're going to lose votes to reform. But it's a balancing act because, ironically, they'll also lose votes to the left. Like I say, there's this new left wing party that may be being formed that hasn't formally been formed yet, but that will come about from issues like welfare. It's ironic because the government's tough where they shouldn't be, and they're weak where they shouldn't be. Um, I wish I could be more optimistic, but it's hard to give a very glowing appraisal of their domestic record so far. But I do think when it comes to crime, I don't just blame politicians. I don't just blame the government of the day. The system itself is tone deaf. I think far too many judges are out of touch. I think the legal establishment is out of touch. I think the parole service is out of touch. I think the Court of Appeal is out of touch. And I back that up because the number of referrals to the Court of Appeal that get declined is far, far higher than those that get overturned. In other words, there is a recourse for the public to complain about a sentence being too lenient. But first of all, you need to get the Attorney General to refer that to the Court of Appeal. If it is referred, the number of cases that are actually overturned, i.e., a case is deemed a conviction, a sentence, excuse me, is deemed to be too lenient, the number of examples where that actually happens is minuscule. In other words, the Court of Appeal, in my opinion, are arrogant. They're elitist. They're out of touch. They do not care about public opinion. That is a disgrace. So Politicians can talk tough on crime, but if they try to interfere with the sentencing committee, then they'll be accused of interfering with the judiciary. I think the sentencing committee deserves a lot more scrutiny and pressure. Ultimately, I think the buck falls with them regarding sentencing guidelines. And there's two areas particular I think remain far too lenient: violent young offenders and dangerous driving. And it's an absolute disgrace, far from what Lord Timpson said about we punish too many people. There's too many career criminals who get conviction after conviction and still avoid prison. I actually think that a violent, unprovoked offence that is outside of self-defence or defending another person, I think a violent, unprovoked offence should be a mandatory prison sentence. But that doesn't happen, at least not in every case. I do think there's too many judges that are out of touch. I'm not going to say all of them, but I honestly, I have no faith in our justice system. And I think the arrogant legal establishment has a lot to answer for. The Court of Appeal, the Sentencing Council, and many judges. And yeah, some politicians as well, the likes of Lord Timpson, for instance. Okay, rather than read all of this out, I'm going to just skim over it because I'm aware that I've already been talking for over 20 minutes. So just sort of skim over this. So Eleanor Langford talks about the economy. Manifesto pledge: deliver economic stability with tough spending rules so we can grow our economy and keep taxes, inflation, and mortgages as low as possible. Verdict: Labour has delivered economic stability in the narrow sense of avoiding market shocks, but growth remains sluggish. Sticking to Tory spending plans has reassured markets, but the Chancellor has boxed herself in. The jury is still out. I should say that there's a whole segment on progress and challenges ahead, but just to condense this a bit, I'm jumping straight to the verdict part. Housing: Manifesto pledge: reform or planning rules to build the railways, roads, labs, and 1.5 million homes we need, and develop a new 10-year infrastructure strategy. Verdict: the public still trusts Labour more than its rivals on housing, but results are limited so far. Without faster action, the 1.5 million homes pledge for England is unlikely to be met. National Health Service Manifesto pledge: cut NHS waiting times to 40,000 more appointments every week, double the number of cancer scanners, a new dentistry rescue plan, and 8,500 additional mental health staff, return of the family doctor. A quick word on that: I had my own experience yesterday, in fact, with dentistry. I had a tooth removed. Bloody painful. I have to say the dentist was very professional. She was reassuring. Um, I think some of our healthcare professionals are some of the best in the world, but I do think dentistry has long been underfunded. It's always been kind of the poor sister to the rest of the NHS. So I'd like to see a new dentistry rescue plan. Yeah, that's good. But that I feel that's long been underfunded. Challenges ahead. The public remains sceptical and is yet to be convinced that Labour could do what it promised. The NHS, of course, is the baby of the Labour Party, so this is a personal thing for the Labour Party, um, but that's the verdict. Infrastructure Manifesto pledge: unleash investment with a new National Wealth Fund to invest in the industries of the future and Greater British Energy to accelerate the transition to clean power. Our plan will create 650,000 jobs in the industries of the future. Verdict: it has made early progress, but the results won't be visible before the next election. And finally, immigration. Manifesto pledge: launch a new border security command with hundreds of new specialist investigators and use counter-terror powers to smash criminal boat gangs. Verdict: it smashed the gangs policy has failed to stop the boats. Um, but I will say briefly on this progress. Provisional estimates show a decline in migration last year, but was long expected to fall from its historic high in 2021. So it has actually been a slight decline in migration, but won't be enough to dissuade people who are going to go to reform. So, my own verdict: um, foreign policy, I give Labour 5 out of 10. Possibly being generous, 6 out of 10. I would also say Starmer has been far too cautious regarding Donald Trump. I think offering Trump a state visit was a very big mistake. It's absolutely not necessary. I'd much prefer he focuses on resetting with the EU. And I think generally Western leaders need to stop kowtowing to Trump. You know, the only leader that's really stood up to him in the West is Mark Carney. I'd like to see more of that. Um, so for me, it's difficult to give Labour more than 5 out of 10 on foreign policy. Strong on Russia. They've improved with their approach to Israel and Palestine, and strong on the EU reset. Weak on China, weak on Trump. Um, so 5 out of 10, maybe 6 out of 10. Domestically, honestly, 4 out of 10. I think Labour has disappointed a lot of people. I think that the two-tier policing issue, two-tier care, that is going to stick unless Starmer and his party really start to understand public anger in that regard. We need to absolutely abolish the overuse of non-crime hate incidents. Um, I didn't mention the culture wars. Labour's actually moderated a little bit in that regard. We're not seeing extreme sort of woke orthodoxy that we might have seen earlier on. Starmer's no longer talking about, some women have penises and that sort of thing. Um, so actually, I don't think we've necessarily seen the extreme woke dogma that we could have done. So I suppose that's a positive. Um, but this is an interesting situation. We have government has a sizable majority, yet somehow feels weak. Labour need to get a grip on this, otherwise reform, possibly Corbyn's new party, the Liberal Democrats and others are going to make gains. I don't think they have a real threat from the Tories. Uh, Ironically, Labour is losing where it shouldn't be losing. They're losing left-wing support on things like welfare, and they're pitching too much to the right in some ways. And yet, I understand it's necessary. They can't ignore the immigration issue. But even on that, talking about people who were concerned about the grooming gangs as being far right or pandering to the far right, I think was foolish. Labour has done the right thing with that inquiry, but only from pressure. So yeah, overall, I think 5 out of 10, and that's been quite generous. Um, there's a lot of other issues I haven't touched on, but you can't cover everything in one video. I do think the crime issue, the justice issue, to me, that goes beyond party politics. I think the system as a whole needs to change, and I don't think any one party can do that because it would require the judiciary changing. I think there should be a lot more pressure put on the sentencing council and courts to stop showing this contempt for the public and start enacting what the public demand, which is tougher sentencing. Recently, there's been pledges to build more prisons. That's a good thing because it will ease pressure on the system. It will ease pressure on prison staff. But words are cheap. We need to see it happening, and it also needs to be filled with actual criminals, not people involved in Twitter feuds. Um, and Lord Timpson can talk about, will we punish too many people? That's a contradictory message from, the sort of hard on, tough on crime message that Starmer and Cooper want to put out. Um, because successive governments talk tough on crime, but all we ever see is this trickling change. We see slightly change legislation. It's never enough. It's always just, addressing. I think we need a radical overhaul actually in our justice system because the public have no trust. That's the truth. And the long suffering British public, I mean, when I think of the case of Ben Coley, the elderly gentleman murdered by a 15-year-old thug, what did that 15-year-old thug get? 7 years. I would say it should be a minimum of 15 years. Should it be the same as an adult? No. An adult should get 25 years to life. 15-year-old at least 15 years. I think 7 years is a joke, especially when he boasts it afterwards. That sort of thing makes my blood boil and makes me think the sentencing council are living in another planet. Shame on them.